Hello, my name's Jonathan Gribbin, and I'm the Director of Public Health for Nottinghamshire, and I lead the county's response to COVID-19. None of us want our children to miss out on all of the benefits that school brings. So I want to let you know just how hard our schools have been working to ensure that they've all got in place the sensible precautions to receive back pupils at the start of the new year. But of course, all of us need to play our part in stopping the spread. So alongside the guidance you know about already, I also want to urge you to follow the guidance on safe travel to school. Please walk or cycle, or if a car journey really is essential because you live more than 2 miles from school, please arrange drop-offs well away from the school itself. You can find out more details about this and about all of the other government guidance on our website. If you've any questions about plans or arrangements at a particular school, then the school itself will be the best place to answer them. Thank you for watching.
My name's Jonathan Gribbin. I'm the Director of Public Health for Nottinghamshire County, and I'd like to tell you about the COVID-19 Local Outbreak Control Plan for Nottinghamshire. It's all about containing the virus so that we can protect one another, safeguard our critical services, and enable our schools, our workplaces, our communities to flourish again. And the plan describes how we will do that in Nottinghamshire. It complements the national test and trace arrangements, and it builds on local arrangements with key partners like Public Health England, the district and borough councils, the city council and our local NHS. It identifies a range of settings such as schools, workplaces, universities, care homes and so on, which require specific plans to deal with any fresh outbreaks of the virus. It describes how we'll be monitoring on a daily basis to spot if there are any new outbreaks, and then coordinating action to investigate and deal with them, deploying extra testing capacity if we need to, or contact tracing as appropriate. The plan also deals with how we will continue to provide support for people who are made vulnerable because they need to self-isolate, and we'll be doing that through our community support hub. And we'll refine the plan as we go along to reflect the latest best practice and the information which government will be providing to the council. Finally, I want to acknowledge the lengths to which so many people and organisations have gone to already in recent months to stick with the guidance, to maintain social distancing of 2 metres wherever possible, to wash your hands thoroughly and frequently, to stay at home if you or someone in your household has symptoms, to get tested and to follow the advice that you receive when you get the result. By observing the guidance, you're protecting not only your own life and livelihood, that of your friends and also your loved ones, but also that of people you may never meet, but people who you're depending on and whom we must each depend as well. Your role in that is critical. Thank you for your help to contain the virus.
Okay, good morning, members of the Planning Committee. For our listeners, which I'm sure there are many, this is a meeting of the Nottinghamshire County Council Planning and Licensing Committee. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the committee, which is being held remotely, with the majority of the members joining the meeting from their own homes. And for the benefit of our listeners, it should be noted that, as well as myself, Councillor Chris Barnfather, Chair of the Committee, the other members present in the meeting today are Councillor Pauline Allen, Councillor Andy Brown, Councillor Neil Clark, Councillor Jim Creamer, Vice Chairman, Councillor Sybil Fielding, Councillor Kevin Greaves, Councillor John Longden, Councillor Tracy Taylor, Councillor Keith Walker, Councillor Stuart Wallace and Councillor Andy Wetton. At the moment we don't have Councillor Rachel Madden with us, but she may or may not be able to join the meeting as it progresses. We also have the following officers present today: Planning Group Manager Mrs Sally Gill, Development Management Team Manager Jonathan Smith, Planning Officer Mike Hankin, our Solicitor from Legal Services Simon Smith, and the Clerk to the meeting Peter Barker. And I also welcome John Bradshaw of Tarmac. Are you with us, Bradshaw?
I am, yes. Thank you.
Who will be speaking in connection with the Bestthorpe Quarry application. This is the third meeting of the Planning and Licensing Committee to be held in line with the new requirements of the Coronavirus Act 2020. So as usual, please do bear with us if we experience any technical issues. If we do lose any members from the call temporarily, then officers will seek to assist in getting them reconnected as soon as possible, hopefully without the need to halt proceedings. Officers will inform the meeting if they are unable to rectify the problem and if we need the meeting to be paused or adjourned temporarily. And just for members, can I ask that at the end of this committee meeting that you just remain on the line, if you will. I need to discuss a site visit for a future planning application, so please don't switch off and dash to the kettle as soon as the meeting's finished. I'd be grateful. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 1, which is the minutes of the last meeting of the 14th of July 2020, pages 3 to 12 of your bundle. Everybody okay with those minutes and the accuracy thereof? In which case I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. I'm taking it that as nobody's spoken out, that everybody's okay with them. If we move on to item 2 then, apologies for absence please. Mr Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Greaves replaces Councillor Henshaw and Councillor Wallace replaces Councillor Harper, both for this meeting only.
Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. Declarations of interests by members and officers. A, disclosable pecuniary interests. B, private interests, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. I'm taking that to be the negative. Item 4, please. Declarations of lobbying. Thank you. We'll move straight on to item 5, which is proposed eastern extension to Bestthorpe Quarry, Collingham Road, Collingham, Newark, pages 13 to 96 in your bundle. Mr Hankin.
Thank you, Councillor Barnfather. Yes, agenda item 5 relates to a eastern extension to Bestthorpe Quarry at Collingham near Newark. Bestthorpe Quarry was established around 20 years ago and incorporates around 105 hectares of land. The quarry produces around 150,000 tonnes of sand and gravel each year, which is dispatched by HGV using a purpose-built access road leading from the A133 Bestthorpe Road, which links in with the A57 and the primary roads to the north. Planning permission is sought for a 36.2 hectare extension to the quarry, which incorporates 4 arable agricultural fields. The mineral extraction scheme is projected to yield around 3 million tonnes of saleable sand and gravel over a 15-year period, with a projected operational capacity of around 200,000 tonnes per year. Sand and gravel extraction will be undertaken in 2 main working areas, phases D1 to D4 being located to the north of the access road, and phases E1 to E3 are located to the south of the access road. Soil and overburden would progressively be stripped in each phase and utilised to restore the previous working phase. and therefore it would avoid the need to stockpile materials and minimise the amount of despoiled land within the site at any one time. Since sand and gravel wood extraction will be undertaken below the water table, it is necessary to dewater the operational area. This involves a temporary lowering of the groundwater to allow machinery to safely operate within the site. Excavated sand and gravel would be transported to the existing plant site by dump trucks for processing. The eastern extension area would progressively be restored to create 3 large lakes surrounded by meadows around lake margins, willow carr regeneration and wetland hollows. In terms of the publicity, the council has carried out 2 separate rounds of consultation. This coincides with the initial submission of the plan application and the submission of supplementary information under the EIA regulations. The consultation responses are summarised in the report, wherein it is noted that with the exception of Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, the National Grid Power Cable Company and 1 local resident, there are no objections to the plan application. Councillor Dobson, the local member, is supportive of the development. The Besthorpe, in terms of the planning policy assessment, the Besthorpe Eastern Extension site is not allocated for mineral extraction within the adopted Nottinghamshire Minerals Local Plan. Adopted Minerals Local Plan Policy M63 does not support the grant of planning permission for minerals extraction on unallocated sites when the land bank of permitted sand and gravel reserves exceeds 7 years. Since Nottinghamshire's sand and gravel land bank currently stands at 13.76 years, adopted Minerals Local Plan Policy M63 states that planning permission should not be granted for this development. However, the approach within Minerals Local Plan Policy M63 is not consistent with more recently published National Minerals Planning Practice Guidance, which advises that land banks should not be used to set a maximum level of mineral availability. The current Minerals Local Plan was adopted in 2005. It is currently being reviewed and will be replaced by a new Minerals Local Plan. In the replacement Minerals Local Plan, the replacement Minerals Local Plan has now reached an advanced stage of preparation and considerable weight can be given to its policies. In terms of the aggregate supply and land bank, the replacement Minerals Local Plan Policy MP1 states that proposals for mineral extraction outside allocated sites will be supported where a need can be demonstrated. Unlike the adopted Minerals Local Plan Policy M63, the replacement Minerals Local Plan Policy MP1 provides scope to approve new minerals extraction scheme where the land bank exceeds 7 years if a need is demonstrated and therefore is consistent with national policy. In this instance, the increase in land bank would provide some increased security of minerals supply. The adopted Minerals Local Plan incorporates a series of site allocations of sand and gravel extraction, which aim to ensure that Nottinghamshire had sufficient sand and gravel resources throughout the life of the plan, which has an end date of the 31st of December 2014. Since most of these allocations have now been substantially extracted or exhausted, it is almost inevitable that any new sites which come forward at this time will be undertaken on land that is not allocated in the Adoption Minerals Local Plan for minerals extraction. The sand and gravel site allocations are being reviewed and updated as part of the Replacement Minerals Local Plan to ensure that adequate mineral supplies are provided throughout the plan period, which runs to 2036. The new Minerals Local Plan proposes to allocate the current plan application site under policy MP20. A timely decision on this application is now required so that minerals within the Eastern Extension can be worked on a phased basis, utilising the existing plant site and quarry infrastructure for mineral processing, enabling these materials to be sustainably worked and avoid their sterilisation. The quarry extension will maintain the continuity of sand and gravel production at Besthorpe Quarry to serve established markets and the economic benefits which it brings to the local environment in compliance with paragraph 205 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires that When determining plan applications, great weight should be given to the benefits of mineral extraction, including to the economy. It is concluded that the new Minerals Local Plan policies MP1 and MP2 can be given considerable weight in this decision, as MP1 sets out the overall need over the life of the plan, and MP2 identifies the sand and gravel allocations that will meet this need, one of which is Besthorpe East, allocation MP20. As a result of this plan application is a key part of meeting future need, and it isn't going above and beyond the assumptions set out in the new Minerals Local Plan. The new Minerals Local Plan, therefore, is supportive of this plan application, subject to there being no unacceptable environmental impacts. The environmental impact assessment and supplementary Reg 25 response have been referenced to assess the environmental implications of the development, and its findings have been examined. The key environmental issue relates to the extent of benefits that are derived from the restoration of the site. The mineral reserves within the application site incorporate up to 9 metre depth of sand and gravel. This is a comparatively deep sand and gravel reserve in the context of the Trent Valley, and it ensures a high mineral yield is achieved from a comparatively small site area. However, due to the depth of the reserve, upon completion of mineral extraction, there would be a deep excavated void which will backfill with water upon the termination of quarry dewatering. The restoration scheme utilises all the available soils and overburden from the site, as well as supplementary material recovered by underdigging the mineral reserve to reshape, and this will be used to reshape the edges of the quarry void. But due to the depth of the void and the high level of the water table, the restored site will be characterised by large areas which are comparatively rectangular in shape with limited edges and only provide limited marginal habitat. Significant modifications to the restoration scheme to reduce the size and depth of the lakes would only be achieved if either less mineral is extracted from the site or greater volumes of restoration material were available. A reduction in the level of mineral extraction, however, would require the sterilisation of a significant amount of the mineral resource, which would not be sustainable. Additional restoration materials are not available. The applicant has indicated that additional underdigging cannot be achieved for environmental and economic reasons. There clearly is a balance to be reached between the level of mineral extraction and the complexity of the resulting restoration scheme which can be achieved. In this instance, it is considered that the restored lakes and surrounding habitat would provide a visually attractive restoration scheme which would not be alien in character to the surrounding restored habitats in the Trent Valley, where the landscape has already been highly modified as a result of minerals extraction. The implementation of the proposed restoration scheme would result in biodiversity benefits in the long term. The level of ecological benefit has been calculated as a 181 improvement from the existing situation following the restoration of the site. The development therefore is compliant with new Minerals Local Plan Policy SP2, biodiversity-led restoration, insofar that it will enhance the environment and provide biodiversity gain. Potentially greater levels of ecological benefit could be derived from the development through the creation of additional areas of shallow habitats within the restored ponds. But the creation of these shallows would almost certainly result in the sterilisation of mineral reserves. The tensions in planning policy between maximising ecological benefit and maximising the sustainable use of minerals require balance, but it is concluded that the submitted scheme provides a favourable solution between providing ecological benefit and ensuring minerals are sustainably recovered. Planning conditions to regulate the ecological effects of the development are recommended. Specifically, paragraph 274 of the report recommends a Section 106 agreement to secure a scheme for monitoring and potential mitigation for changes in water levels within the Collingham Drain adjacent to Besthorpe Meadows to the north of the site, in addition to requiring vegetation surveys to be undertaken within the SSSI itself. Since the report was published, Natural England has provided additional comments on the application and the impacts on the SSSI, within which they continue to support the provision of monitoring of water levels in the Collingham drain, including any necessary mitigation to maintain existing water levels, but no longer consider it is necessary to undertake the vegetation surveys previously recommended. Natural England reached this conclusion on the basis that provided the water levels in the Collingham drain are maintained at previous levels with or without mitigation, the Section 106 agreement would ensure that vegetation surveys within the SSSI will not be required because the status quo in relation to groundwater levels within the SSSI will remain unchanged. On this basis, it is recommended to remove the requirement for the vegetation surveys within the Bestthorpe Meadow SSSI from the Section 106, as presently recommended in paragraph 274 of the report. The changes you can see on the slide in front of you, which we recommend. The development would have some minor impacts to both built and archaeological heritage assets. However, the level of harm is assessed as less than substantial, and in this instance, the need for the mineral extraction and the economic benefits outweigh the harm to the heritage asset. The projected production capacity from the east extension is 200,000 tonnes per year, which this represents a 50,000 tonnes per year increase over recent production levels. In terms of vehicle movements, the transport of 200,000 tonnes per year would generate an average of approximately 80 HGV movements a day. That's 40 vehicles in and 40 vehicles out of the site. That's an increase of 20 movements, 10 in and 10 out, from the current recent production levels. This is a comparatively small increase in HGV movements and would not raise any highway safety, capacity or amenity concerns, and the local highway network can satisfactorily accommodate these vehicle movements. The operation of the existing quarry is regulated by a lorry routing agreement, which requires all HGV traffic associated with the quarry to journey to and from the application site via the A1133 to the north, as shown on the slide, which is taken from the existing Section 106 agreement. These controls have a successful track record of ensuring that haulage traffic does not travel through the centre of Collingham village, thus not adding to the existing levels of congestion and disturbance from traffic in this village. It is recommended these successful lorry routing controls are carried forward as part of the new Section 106 agreement, should members resolve to grant planning permission. Within their original consultation response, National Grid raised a holding objection, seeking assurances that the quarry workings could be safely undertaken beneath the high voltage power line which crosses the site, particularly in respect of working heights and clearances. The Reg 25 submission incorporates this supplementary information, and National Grid have been formally consulted with this information on 3 separate occasions, but have not provided any response. In the absence of a consultation response from National Grid, it is recommended that planning condition 23 is imposed to require the agreement of a safe working scheme prior to the commencement of soil stripping beneath the cables. The scheme will probably be quite similar to what we've already had, but the approach allows the planning application to be determined at this time whilst protecting National Grid's and the operator's interests to ensure safe working in the vicinity of the power cables. The operational controls identified in the planning submission and regulated by the planning conditions would provide satisfactory control over the day-to-day quarry operations and minimise their effects on the environment and the local community. It is therefore recommended that planning permission be granted for the eastern extension at Bestthorpe Quarry, subject to the application entering into a Section 106 agreement to ensure appropriate regulation for lorry routing and the monitoring of the Collingham drain and the imposition of the planning conditions set out within Appendix 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin, for that comprehensive presentation. We have a recommendation. I formally move that recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please?
Councillor Creamer, I'll formally second and reserve the right to speak, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. I would ask members to wait if they have any questions of the officer for clarification until we enter the debate phase. Mr. Barker, could you perhaps read out the instructions for public speaking?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bradshaw, you will have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and notice will be given to you when the final minute of your allotted time has arrived by my saying 1 minute. You should not introduce new material, be that plan, photographs or written documents. Only issues relevant to the planning application should be addressed in your presentation, and these include the impact on local residents and the environment, relevant planning policies and government guidance. You should not refer to non-planning issues such as property rights, covenants, loss of property value or view. Members of the committee may ask you questions for the purposes of clarification. Mr. Bradshaw, the floor is now yours.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. My name is John Bradshaw. I'm Strategic Planning Manager in Tarmac Central Region. I just wanted to say Tarmac welcomes the fact that this application has been taken to committee. Bestthorpe Quarry is an important site within our supply network of construction aggregates, and Tarmac fully supports and welcomes the recommendations of the report presented to the committee today, and it definitely provides continuity of jobs at the site, plus also the continuity of future supplies to construction projects and supporting the economy as a whole. So that's all I'd like to say, really, and the fact that I'm here if anybody wishes to ask any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. Do members have any questions for Mr. Bradshaw for clarification purposes only? I'm seeing no hands, so I'm taking that as a no.
Chris, you've muted.
My apologies. I'll start that little bit again then. Were there any questions for Mr. Bradshaw for clarification purposes only? I'm taking that as a negative, in which case I'll open up the floor for questions, comments, observations of Mr. Hankin, or general observations. Any member wishing to speak, if you can either raise your hands visually or using the hand application. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose this is a question in principle. My understanding from Mr. Hankin's presentation and our papers is that our current supply is around 13 years. We're required to look to around a 7-year supply. Our general position has been on our plan that's currently going forward for inspection is that we would not simply identify sites that would oversupply and oversupply. So that should be our protection against applications for sites that are outside our allocation. In this instance, we're saying that the site isn't one of those that we've identified and allocated, and yet we're proposing to approve it. So what I'm trying to understand is whether, by, for instance, approving this one against that principle, we put ourselves at risk of approving future fresh sites. So if I've understood correctly, and I'm just trying to get sort of through my thought processes, my understanding is that our rationale for it in this case is that whilst this is a site not yet identified and allocated, it is seen to be more appropriate to approve it because it is an extension rather than an entirely fresh site. and that is potentially part of the rationale we would then use to defend ourselves against future fresh sites. You see what I'm trying to protect against. So I'm just trying to understand if I have understood Mr. Hankins' logic progression correctly, and that we will still be in a position to defend ourselves should applications come forward for entirely fresh sites in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Paragraph 84 of the planning practice guidance states that there is no maximum land bank level.
Yep.
Each application for minerals extraction must be considered on its own merits, regardless of the length of the land bank. Mr. Hankin, you may wish to add to that.
Yeah, that is the key change between probably the adopted mineral circle plan, and we've got policy M63, which sort of sets almost 7 years as almost working to a maximum. That once you go above 7 years, you can refuse planning permission for development. That's changed with, as you say, Chris, the planning practice guidance, which that states that there is not a maximum level of minerals extraction. I think, as Councillor Taylor says, she has concern that this sort of opens the floodgates to granting planning permission for a quarry here, there, and everywhere. In particular, yeah, it is notable that we have got a replacement local plan, which is at a very advanced stage, and in this decision, we've, as officers, we've attached quite substantial weight to the policies in that plan. Particularly, there are tests in terms of what weight you should give to emerging policies in making planning decisions, and in particular, that's summarised in paragraphs 131 and 132 of the report. Basically, you can attach more weight to policies in emerging plans depending on the stage of preparation of the plan. Obviously, the mineral circle plan is at an advanced stage. It's awaiting an examination. The extent, the second point is the extent to which there are unresolved objections to the policies of the plan. Well, there are no objections to the best thought quarry allocation. In fact, it's a matter of record that it wasn't proposed in the previous draft of the plan, and the council actually got objections from the local community that it wasn't included. The community wanted it included, and the third point is the degree of consistency with the policies of the emerging plan and the NPPF. Well, the plan is consistent in our view. I think in answer to, well, if we grant this, how will we resist sort of another quarry down the road being granted planning permission? I think the answer to that question is in paragraph 144, where it's acknowledged that the size of this mineral reserve, it is a large reserve. It will strategically influence market conditions and the pattern of mineral supply within the Nottinghamshire area. However, Bestthorpe East is identified as a site allocation in the new mineral circle plan, and the grant of planning permission at this time would not result in any unforeseen adverse impacts to the implementation of the new minerals local plan following its adoption, particularly given the lack of unresolved objections to the allocation in the publication version of the mineral circle plan heading into this examination. Granting this site at this stage will not jeopardise the new plan. It's a logical extension. In our view, it's sustainable. If we had an application for a quarry down the road, which was a totally new quarry, I think some of those arguments, and it's not an allocated site, I think some of those arguments would not hold true to that site.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin. Councillor Taylor, does that answer your query?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really to partly comment on Councillor Taylor's comment, which is a very valid comment. I think from a planning point of view, I take comfort, and I'm quite satisfied that with this being an extension, it is different very much to a new site, which would have to have total new infrastructure. Whereas obviously an extension of this type, the infrastructure is already in place, and therefore the impact on the neighbouring land, etc., is far less than establishing infrastructure for a new site. So I hope that she's comforted by the fact that the infrastructure is there and there's less impact. I'm quite happy with the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. That's a helpful observation. Mr. Hankin, is there anything you wish to add to Councillor Clark's response?
I've got nothing to add. I think he's totally summarised the issue exactly the same as I would summarise it myself. I totally agree with him.
Do you have any vacancies in your department at the moment, Mr. Hankin?
Depends what the pay's like, Mr. Chairman.
Just thinking forward to next May, Councillor Clark, that's all. Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. Just to formulate a question I'm going to ask later, but Councillor Tracy has brought the question forward. We're talking about, say, new quarries, but my question is simple for clarification. And after 2036, will then Council be sitting decide on a further massive extension to this particular quarry? Now that does concern me greatly, as we are taking out 4 more arable fields. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hankin, would you like to comment on that?
I don't know what will happen at 2036 in terms of quarry production. Yeah, we've got an adopted plan at the moment which made minerals provision up to 31st of December 2014. It's clear that plan's out of date. We're required to plan for minerals supply, and the new plan takes up to 2035. I think it is right, Councillor Longden, that in 2035 it's more than likely the council will need to allocate further lands for sand and gravel extraction in Nottinghamshire. With minerals, once it's a finite resource, once you've used it, it's gone. You have to extract somewhere else. But I don't know where that will be. There is sand and gravel in the Besthorpe area, so I don't think. I can't sit here today and say there will not be any further extensions at Besthorpe anytime in the future, but certainly this is a 15-year mineral extraction scheme. I don't think we'll be hearing from Tarmac at Besthorpe with further extensions for the next few years. This will serve this quarry for the next 15 years of production, plus the 2 or 3 years remaining they've got actually in the site or in the existing consented area.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin. Does that answer your question, Councillor Longden?
To some degree, Chair, but it looks like it's going to be left to a future council after 2036 and onwards to decide just how big this quarry will be allowed to grow. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longden. I think in fairness, we have to consider the application that's before us today and what may or may not happen in 10 years' time, as you quite rightly point out, will be a matter for any future planning committee to determine should there be an application at that point. Do you have any other questions, observations or comments from members, please? Councillor Wallace. Sorry, Stuart, I think you're making my mistake and your microphone's on mute.
Right. You're right, Chris. You're on sync. A question for clarification, please, and then a couple of observations and questions, if I may. You talk in the report of sterilisation of minerals. Now, I'm not au fait with excavating sizes. Can you just explain to me what you mean by sterilisation of minerals? Why certain action then takes you into that sterilisation process? What does it do and what does it affect operations? If you could give me that bit first.
Certainly, Councillor Lawrence. The minerals are in the ground.
Well, it's Wallace, but don't worry, people get confused.
Wallace, sorry. The minerals are in the ground and they will stay there. The minerals, how the minerals could get sterilised is that to extract those minerals, the company will need a processing plant to process it and an access to the highway network. If the quarry was to follow its existing planning permission, basically they're in the final phase of the quarry. They've got about 2 years in the final in the current phase, and then the consented quarry phasing scheme requires them to actually, they will remove their plant and they will quarry underneath the plant, bring in some temporary equipment. So effectively they remove the plant site. They will then restore the whole quarry. You know, the settlement lagoons will be removed and the quarry plant will be removed. The haul road will be removed. So if that was all to happen in 5-10 years time, somebody wanted to extract this site, they would then have to put in a new access road, they'd then have to put in a new plant site, a new washing plant, new settlement lagoons. And it comes down to almost an economic sterilisation. That is the size of this mineral reserve adequately large enough to justify that investment in whole new plant, whole new infrastructure on the site. And there is potential that, you know, I'm not saying it definitely would sterilise it, but there certainly is potential that it would sterilise that mineral reserve, because this amount of sand and gravel wouldn't be big enough to support that capital investment in whole new plant. It's economically and probably environmentally more sustainable to use the existing facilities, which are located further away from the nearby village. Collingham Village, you'd be putting a plant a lot closer to Collingham Village. Plants are noisy, the noisiest, dustiest aspects of a sand and gravel site, and it's in the benefits to have that what is probably over a kilometre from the village rather than what potentially would be within about 500-600 metres of the village. So yeah, I'm not saying that you couldn't get it out under any minerals scheme, but it certainly makes it less environmentally and less economically viable to remove it and potentially sterilise it, because, you know, a company wouldn't do the scheme because they'd make no money out of it, and sterilise the mineral in that respect.
Okay, thank you. I've heard very similar arguments to that in years gone by in Derbyshire with the chalk quarries, etc., which effectively just got abandoned and were left then for nature to take back over. I just leave that one to float. For my first question then is, I noticed that Wildlife Trust made great play over the water depths, and I'm presuming that what they're meaning by that, there is sort of almost a, this is an ignorant term, but a shore, as in sloping water, allowing more access of livestock, birds, etc., rather than a sheer drop. Probably won't be a sheer drop, but I use the two. If that is so, do we not actually affect the wildlife usage of it? Because I have, as I've ploughed my way through the report, I haven't seen anyone come up with an alternative argument, or that Wildlife Trust have gone away from that one. And then I have a final question in respect to 106. But if you'd like just to tell me on the sloping and the short, etc., I'd be obliged.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wallace. Yeah, in my presentation, I talked about the depth of the mineral reserve here. I think at its steepest, the amount of sand and gravel in this site is about, I think it's about 9.5 metres in depth, which in the Trent Valley, that's deep. You know, most sand and gravel sites working probably nearer 4 or 5 metres of depth. Where that's good in terms of minerals extraction is that if you're digging 9 metres of minerals depth for a much smaller site area, you're getting a lot of mineral out of it. So, you know, if you need 3 million tonnes and it's only 3 metres deep, you need 3 times more the site area than a site which is 9 metres deep. Where it's disadvantaged from an ecological point of view is that you are creating quite deep lakes. You know, these works are under the water table, and you turn the pumps off, they backfill with water, so you get in deep lakes. And ecology doesn't live 9 meters down in the water. It tends to live in the top, probably about the first meter of depth or so is where the ecology lives. What the Wildlife Trust concern is that if you had more area shallows, you would have more ecology. What the Tarmac have done here with this scheme is they've got soils, and they've got overburden and material between the soils and the quarry and the sand and gravel. They're also under digging at the bottom of the lake to create more materials. I think about 480,000 cubic meters or something, and they're using that material to put around the edge of the lakes to create as much as they can as shallows. The Wildlife Trust would like to see more. We've taken our own ecology advice, and our ecologist says, well, you could do more, but this is an ecologically acceptable scheme. We've asked, one of the things we asked Tarmac to do as part of the supplementary information was you can calculate the level of ecological benefit from the development. It's a DEFRA sort of formula you put the numbers into, and in my presentation I believe I talked about it. From the existing situation, the calculation is that this will be 181% improvement to ecology than the existing situation. I think the wildlife's objection is you could do more, which, you know, you could create maybe a more ecologically interesting feature here, but to do that you would either need to take out less mineral to have more shallow areas, or potentially source more restoration materials, maybe operate a landfill, potentially maybe one solution. That's not on the table. It's not being proposed by Tarmac. There is a balance to be reached. I talked about in my presentation and report. I think in this case there is an acceptable balance between the ecological benefits of the site. The restoration scheme is ecologically beneficial in the existing situation, and after all, this is a minerals extraction scheme. It's a scheme to get minerals out of the site, which it does very successfully. It's 3 million tonnes of minerals. That's 2 years annual production to Nottinghamshire's land bank, and it means that we're not having to excavate maybe land elsewhere where there may be similar greater ecological effects. So it's a balance, but in this case I think the balance is right.
Yeah, well, that's almost like holding an axe over someone's head, isn't it? If we don't go down this line, we're going to finish up having to go somewhere else that you may not want to go to at all. So I'm never quite sure that there's almost like an implicit sort of threat for coming off in the future. I mean, I appreciate 161% to me is an increase, a massive increase. So from what is the starting point then, before the 161% is attached to it? Were the treatments given up on the site as it stands poor, or were they quite high themselves and these are taking them up to a very high level? Or where do we actually stand? Or you as the expert, where do you advise as we stand?
Right. In terms of the site itself, the characteristics of the site, it's 4 arable agricultural fields. Arable agricultural fields, you know, they're cropped each year. They're not really ecologically important. They're not designated at all. There's no ecological designation. There's no real notable species, protected species on the site. Where the interest of the existing site is in the perimeter hedgerows and the perimeter field boundaries. They are being retained on the whole. There is a hedgerow, a rather gappy hedgerow, if that's the right way to call it, which goes through the northern extraction area. That is being removed. But in terms of where we stand at the moment, this site, it is a comparatively low ecologically important site. I've talked about the DEFRA biodiversity metric calculation, and in paragraph 183 of the council's report, it gives some numbers there. This biodiversity metric calculation is effectively a formula which tries to calculate what the existing habitat value is, what the new habitat value is. The current site has 87.89 ecological units of value to it. The calculation is that following restoration of the site, the habitat quality would equate to 247 units of ecological value. That's a gain of 159 units, or 181%. Those benefits basically come from you removing the arable agricultural land, and you know this site, when it's restored, will be wholly an ecological reserve. The Wildlife Trust concern is that you could do more, you know, yes, and you could do more, but I think it's important that we've consulted Natural England, the government's ecological advisor, who initially had some reservations about the development in terms of impact to SSSI. They now have no objections. The other thing is we've obviously got our own in-house ecological advisor who I've worked very closely with, and he's seen the Wildlife Trust comments. The ecological advisor, again, he's happy with the scheme. He doesn't object. You know, in my view, this scheme will provide ecological benefit to the site. The balance, the site tensioners policy is could you do more? And I think in most decisions you make, you could do more, but in my view is they've done enough, they've done plenty enough, there is a benefit, and there is no reason to refuse this. It will, it will provide ecological benefit following this mineral scheme to the existing situation.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin.
Thank you.
Wallace, did you have another point to make?
I had another one, then I'll shut up, Chris. I just want to refer you away from the quarry, etc., and just if I can paint a picture from the quarry that we have outside Newark, which is for landfill, and you'll see my point. When you look at the road there, it's in an absolutely terrible condition, and it's pounded by heavy goods vehicles servicing the quarry or taking stuff to the quarry. When I press on that one, the answer is, well, yeah, I want to know if when they came up for an extension of the quarry's life, I was pushing for additional funding to repair the road to make it far better. I was told it was not possible because the original plan had taken into account that the road could deal with that sort of movage. It doesn't. I think people accept it doesn't, but we haven't been able to do anything about it. I know that the quarry here that we're talking about is actually on an A road and therefore gets far more treatment faster, earlier, and than we would in a C-class road, etc., for the landfill. But are we looking, should we not be looking for any form of monies to come from the quarrying, extension of the quarrying, for the extra damage, etc., that inevitably it must cause to the road surface and system?
Yeah, we've obviously consulted Nottinghamshire County Council Highways Department on this, and they've looked at the existing roads on the site. They are happy that the roads are of an adequate standard to accommodate the traffic. They are, as you say, they are in generally good state of repair. In terms of the maintenance of the roads, they are maintained. They are adopted highway and they are maintained. It's not normal practice that you would impose on a planning condition a requirement to maintain a public road. The lorries, they do pay the appropriate taxes for using the road. Tarmac pay their business rates. The lorries pay their road fund license, and the road that is the system for maintaining these roads. The roads are adequate to take the traffic.
Thank you. I'll remain someone in the forest shouting, but no one listens to me. Yes, thank you. Sorry, Chris.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hankin, for your responses. Do you have any other questions or observations from members? Okay, thank you. Obviously, there are a number of matters raised there. I think Councillor Taylor raised the question about maximum land banks, and that's been adequately answered by Mr. Hankin. And the issue in relation to the fact is that this site is not in the current minerals local plan, but that plan, of course, is now many years out of date. And I think, again, Mr. Hankin has explained in some detail that this site will be included at a point of adoption in the new minerals local plan. Again, in some detail, I think Mr. Hankin has explained that there has to be a balance between ecological benefit and economic sustainability in response to Councillor Wallace's questions. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to move to the vote on this matter. In order to make it easier for recording this, bearing in mind that we are audible, the clerk will read out members' names alphabetically in order for them to confirm whether they are voting for or against the recommendations, or indeed abstaining. Please note that the votes today will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting as a recorded vote unless 2 or more members request it in line with the usual recorded vote arrangements. So, Mr. Barker, could I ask you to call this to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Allen? Councillor Allen, can you hear me? Councillor Allen, is your vote for or against, or are you abstaining? Well, perhaps we'll come back to Councillor Allen. Councillor Barnfather?
For.
Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Clark? Councillor Clark? I think you're on mute. Can't unmute. Okay, Councillor Clark has just confirmed his vote. Thank you. Councillor Creamer.
For.
Councillor Fielding.
For.
Councillor Greaves.
For.
Councillor Longden.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Walker.
For.
Councillor Wallace. Hello, Councillor Wallace. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. For.
For. Thank you. Councillor Wetton.
For.
And Councillor Allen, can you hear me now?
For.
Thank you. That's carried, Chair.
Thank you for bearing with us there.
You're on mute, Chris.
We'll get used to this eventually. I do apologise. Thank you for bearing with us and for my inadequacy with the microphone. Thank you for getting back to us, Councillor Allen. We thought that we'd lost you. And Councillor Clark for dashing into the office to confirm his vote was indeed for, despite his microphone not working. In that case, the application is approved. Thank you for your attendance, Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you.
I'll move now on to item 6, then Development Management Progress Report. I've got this down for Mrs. Gill to introduce it. Are you with us, Mrs. Gill? I'm sorry.
Yes, I am, and hopefully, councillors, you can all hear me. This is the regular progress report setting out the planning applications we've received as a planning authority and the ones that we've determined since your last meeting in July. As ever, I don't propose to go through the tables line by line, but if members have any questions on any particular applications, the team will be very happy to answer those. And as ever, the final part of the appendix sets out the applications that are likely to be coming to committee in October, and it also lists the applications that we have under consideration, but as yet we haven't yet got a target committee date for. But as you are aware, that list and that schedule changes fairly frequently, but we're very happy to answer any questions on any applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gill. So the recommendation is that committee considers whether there are any actions they require in relation to the contents of the report, which I formally move. To have a seconder, please.
I unmute. Councillor Creamer, formally second.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Do members have any questions for the officer, or indeed any observations or comments?
No.
Okay, I'm taking that everybody is in favour of that, unless anybody speaks to the contrary in that case. That's the end of the formal agenda for this meeting. I thank you all for attending and for anybody who's listening in. If we can now go off the broadcast, please, so that we can discuss some dates for a future site meeting.